I've just finished harvesting my goldenrod, and so when you finish harvesting, you've got two options. You can either start your dye bath right away and use it fresh, or you can dry it out, and both work quite well. If you're going to dry it out, I would suggest that you have stems a little longer, and you probably want to get between 8 and a dozen stems together. And what you do is you put them together and then hang them upside down, and you hang them up for about 6 weeks, and then these will dry out and they're perfect. You can store them and you can dye all the way through the winter time if you want to. But today I'm going to be doing fresh dyeing with goldenrod. And so what I do is I get my goldenrod, and I'm not really interested in dyeing the green leaves or the stems. So what I will do is I will take the flower part and I'll just cut it off like that. And I'm going to fill the pot. I'm going to fill the pot 2/3 of the way, and then I'll fill it up with water and top it up with water and let it simmer. Now the leaves are fantastic. They've got wonderful story to them. You can eat them. They're very healthy and good for you. They're good for your urinary tract. They also act as a diuretic. But also, Thomas Edison was fascinated by goldenrod, and he was looking into the possibility of extracting rubber from the plant. And he was very successful. And he was about to develop a tire for the cars. However, it was close to the end of his life. He died, and he didn't have an opportunity to finish his research. And so other scientists came in, looked at it, but they weren't able to extract the percentage of rubber that Edison was able to extract. So it never took off as a potential for making tires. A couple other interesting things about goldenrod. You know, when I was a kid growing up, I was told that goldenrod was evil. It grew in ditches, and people were allergic to it. It was just awful. No one wanted to see it. And when I was a young adult, I was traveling through Europe, and I was in Paris, and I went by some beautiful, beautiful flower shops, and I saw goldenrod there, and I thought, you know, why are you selling goldenrod? It's a weed and it grows in the ditch. So I started researching it, looking into it, and it has actually a fantastic history. But I want to address some of the misinformation about goldenrod. A lot of people think that goldenrod causes allergies, seasonal allergies, and the pollen actually isn't airborne. It's transferred from bees. And so the culprit really is, in most cases, ragweed. And ragweed grows in the same area as goldenrod. It has the same season as goldenrod. Actually, I was picking this morning, just a couple hours ago, and bumped into a woman, and she was asking about, what are you picking? And I told her goldenrod, and she said, well, is that just another name for ragweed? And I said, absolutely not. There are over 130 different types of goldenrod throughout the world. It's primarily in North America, but there is some in Europe and Asia as well. In Ontario, Canada, where I live, there are at least 30 species, or 30 types of goldenrod. And the one that I'm picking today is called Canada goldenrod, and it grows almost my height. And it's got a beautiful golden yellow color on the tip, and it's fantastic for dyeing. But goldenrod's also been used for a number of other things throughout history. It was years ago, before, if there was a war on, or if groups were fighting and it happened to be goldenrod season, they would go out and collect or harvest the goldenrod, and then they would make a paste out of it. And the paste was used to heal wounds from war. So it's been used to heal wounds on people. It's also been used as a tea. For those of you who've read about the Boston Tea Party, the tea was dumped into the ocean and they didn't have any tea to drink. So they used goldenrod for that as well. But goldenrod is also used to soothe your throat. If you've got a sore throat, you can actually chew the ends of the goldenrod, and it will help soothe your throat. So it's got so many fantastic properties to it. So my idea of goldenrod has completely changed as an adult, and the more I learn about it, the more I love it. But I will tell you, this is the long weekend in the first weekend in September. In Canada, it's Labor Day weekend, and a lot of people get excited because it's canning season. The tomatoes are up and people are starting to can tomatoes. I get really excited because this is the weekend that I usually use to harvest goldenrod. And goldenrod really hits its peak around this weekend. It depends on the type of goldenrod, but I harvest it routinely on this weekend and get as much as I can because I like to carry some of it throughout the winter as well. But the color that comes out of goldenrod is spectacular. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill up this bucket, and so it's going to be 2/3 full of the goldenrod. I'll fill it up with water, and I will let it simmer for anywhere from 2 to 3 hours. You do not want to boil it, because if you boil it, goldenrod is very sensitive to heat, and it will turn a rusty, orangey color. And that's not the color I'm going for today. If that's the color you want, go for it. But I want it to be as close to the yellow color as possible. So what I'm going to do is gently simmer it again for 2 to 3 hours, and then once I do that, we'll come back and we'll start dyeing yarn. We're at the point now where the goldenrod has been simmering for about 3 hours, and it smells fantastic. And you can tell that it's ready for two things. One, remember I said it's really important not to overcook it and have it boil because it turns a different color, or it turns a dark color. What you want to see is a nice goldenrod color. So we'll hopefully keep our fingers crossed that we've got a nice color. Look at that. That's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So we know that we're ready to move to the next step. The next step is you want to get rid of all of this stuff. You want to get rid of the goldenrod and leaves, because if you put your yarn in, all the leaves and the goldenrod is going to stick to your yarn because your yarn has barbs on it if it's not superwashed, and so it'll get all tangled. So it's very important to drain this, or strain this, pardon me. So what I'll do is I'll start doing that. I find that if I scoop some of the water out firstly, then it's just not as heavy and it's easier to manage when I go through. So what I'm doing is I've got a clean bucket, and I'm just going to scoop this out. And I've let it cool down as well, so it's not incredibly hot when I'm managing this. I let it cool down for about half an hour. It smells so nice. I can understand why people make tea out of this. Okay, that looks good, so I want to get rid of the goldenrod. I've emptied all of the liquid in here, and I got rid of the goldenrod, put it back in the forest. And there we go, I've got the liquid in here. So the next step is, if I put the yarn in right now and let it sit, I'll pull it out and it'll be a beautiful color. However, the color's not going to stay. I need to have a mordant to bind the color to the yarn. So I'm going to use alum. You can use oak galls from oak trees, and you can use sumac. I've got sumac over there, and you can use the leaves of that. Anything with tannin in it will work. You can also use avocado pits as well. But I like using alum when I have goldenrod, and I like using it because it really complements the color of the dye bath. And so the rule of thumb is, if you have an idea of how much yarn you're going to dye, the alum is 10%, so 10% of the weight of the yarn. And the yarn you measure when it's dry, not wet. So for me, that equates to about 2 tablespoons. And so I'm going to shake this up. You can see by adding the alum, it's already changed color. And see, it's a great yellow. Now, it's very important that you don't exceed 10% of the weight of the yarn to any extreme, because what will happen is the yarn will become brittle, and so you don't want the yarn to become brittle. So stick to 10% of the weight of the yarn. So I'm going to add this in. And again, I can do this holding a mason jar because it's not extremely hot. If I were using boiling water, I wouldn't be able to use the mason jar. You can also pour the alum in as well, but I find that it dissolves better with warm water and shaking it. The next ingredient I'm going to add is cream of tartar. Cream of tartar, the rule of thumb is if you were using, let's say I were using 2 tablespoons of alum, you would cut that in half for your cream of tartar. So I'm going to use half of that. I'm going to use 1 tablespoon. So remember, you've got your weight of the yarn, and then 10% of that is the amount of alum you use, and then half of that is the amount of cream of tartar you use. So I'll put the cream of tartar in now. And I've already received a bunch of questions in terms of the color of your yarn. What colors are going to come out when you add it? There's a number of variables that impact the color of the yarn with goldenrod and with most plants. It's the water that you use. The pH level of the water can definitely have an impact on the color of your yarn. The mordant that you use, like I used alum, and I mentioned there's other mordants as well that may have an impact. And for example, I can use iron. If I add iron to this, it will make the color darker. Also, the botanicals you're using for goldenrod. If I were to pick goldenrod 2 weeks ago, I'd get a green hue to the color. If it's later in season, you're going to get a darker color to the yellow. So a number of variables to consider when you're doing this. Also, I mentioned heat earlier. Heat really has an impact on it, so try not to boil it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to heat this up again, and then I'm going to add my yarn. Okay, the temperature is heating up now. Remember, I don't want this to go to a boil, because if it goes to a boil, it will change the color. So I want to keep it at a simmer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my yarn. This is Blue Face Leicester and silk, and I'm going to add that in. You can use anything. You can use any type of wool, any type of fiber, alpaca, anything you have. So I'm going to put this in, and I'm going to let this sit for approximately, I'm going to check it in 20 minutes and see what it looks like. And then we'll see if it's yellow enough, and then we'll be done. Okay, it's showtime. I am going to reach in and pull it out, and we'll take a look at the color. Oh, this is nice. This is really nice. Look at that yellow. It really took to the yellow. That is really, really super. This is one of the reasons, again, why I love dyeing with goldenrod, because the color takes to the yarn so beautifully, and it really showcases the vibrant colors of goldenrod. Yeah, I'm really happy with that color. When you look at it, it's pretty much bang on to the goldenrod, so it retained a lot of the color. So what you do next is you take your yarn and you want to rinse it, because you're not going to lose any of the color that's already on here, but there's excess color on it, and so you want to make sure that gets off. So I will dunk it in water to wash it, and I'll dunk it in the water and keep squeezing it out until I don't have any excess color coming off. And what I do is, a trick I have is I have a mason jar, and so when I think I'm pretty much there and there isn't any excess color coming out, I will take it out of the water, squeeze it, and if the liquid that's in the mason jar that's coming from the yarn is clear, I know I'm done. And that's an excellent sign, because that means you're pretty much ready to let your yarn dry and you can start knitting with it. So some people will use a soap afterwards, a scented soap. I would say, you want a pH neutral soap. You don't want to alter the color at all. So But again, you dry it and you're all set. I just wanted to go over the steps one more time, just so that we're clear. So I started by gathering the goldenrod and cutting off the stems, trying to get as much of the beautiful golden color as possible. Put it into a pot. I filled it up 2/3 of the way, and then I filled the rest with water, and I let it simmer for, you can let it simmer for anywhere 2 to 6 hours. You can leave it overnight even, but remember, do not boil it because it changes the color of the liquid, and you'll get definitely a different color yarn either as well. So once you've let it stew for 6 hours, 2 hours, 3 hours, you'll take it off, and then you will drain or strain to get rid of the flowers and the leaves that are in it. You don't want to leave those in when you're dyeing your yarn because it will stick to the barbs of the yarn. So once you get that in, you put the liquid back in, then you get your mordant. The mordant was used to take the color from the plant and have it stick or bind to the yarn. The mordant that we used was alum, and I used 10% of the weight of the yarn, all of the yarn that I'm doing in here. And then I also used cream of tartar. Cream of tartar was 5% of the weight of the yarn. After we had that in there, I let this sit for 20 to 30 minutes. I checked on the color. I'm really happy with the color. This is not going back in. And once you're happy with it, you take it out and you wash it, and you get all the excess color off of it. And then once it's ready, you dry it and you're ready to go knitting. So that's it. Those are all the steps to dyeing goldenrod. It's not too difficult. And again, there's a number of variables that can have an impact on the color, but if you keep your eye on it, you're good to go. So I hope you try it at home. I'd love to see what it looks like after you've dyed your yarn. Love your comments as well. So take care, everyone, and happy dyeing with goldenrod. You're going to hear popping or noises. That's actually gunfire that's happening around the cabin. The bear season has started now. It's actually started yesterday, and so there's been gunshots around.